Hi, everybody. What we will do is I'm just going to answer your questions. I don't have a prepared set of things to go over. I cannot see everyone on the same screen, obviously, with this many people here. So Josh is here with us. Josh, you want to say hello?
Hi, everybody.
And so if you will raise hands, then I'll answer a question. And Josh will tell me who's got the next question because he'll keep track of who has raised hands. And that way I can concentrate on just answering the questions. So Josh, has someone raised their hand and are they ready to go?
So if you're raising your hand on the video, instead hit the raise hand button below the participants, because then I can keep track of it.
So if somebody has a question.
So
just
it should be Matthew. Yeah, I see your hand raised now.
Okay. Yeah, mine was about, so when you've got the different tax brackets and you've got like you're making, so like the different income is being taxed at different percentages.
Yes.
How do you calculate the amount of taxes that someone's paying if they're paying like in multiple different tax brackets?
So
like the example from the lecture was like only two, but it was like someone making $100,000 and 0 to 50,000 is taxed at 0%. And then greater than 50,000 is taxed at 50%.
So let's just have an example where we have three tax brackets. And so you have a 0%. So these are percents. And somebody's phone's ringing. 0%, and that applies up to say $30,000. And I'm just going to write K for 30,000. And then you have a 30% tax rate for the range 30 to 50. And then you have a 50%. And that applies for 50 to 100. And someone's making, let's start out with somebody's making 50,000. If they're making 50,000, their marginal tax rate is actually going to be 50%, because if they make an extra dollar, that's going to be taxed at this 50% rate. Are you with me, Matthew?
Yeah.
Their average tax rate will be, they're paying 30%.
Yes.
30% on $20,000 on 20K, which is going to be $6,000. Okay, that they're paying. This is like the one, and you remember what was done in that video? Other people on this call don't know what was done in that video. So this is catching everybody up to the idea that you can have this is, and now what your average tax rate is going to be is it's going to be $6,000 is what you're paying on $50,000 in income. And I didn't get things that will round off very easily, but it's going to be about 12%. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's do the same exercise, but now let's do a person who's making 100,000. So if they're making 100,000, their marginal tax rate is still going to be, and this is, you're going to pay 50% And let's just say for anything greater than 50,000. So you're making $100,000, your marginal tax rate is still going to be 50%, because that's that upper tax bracket. You're going to pay $6,000 on your first 20,000, or sorry, on the interval between 30 and 50, you're paying $20,000. Between 50 and 100, you're going to be paying half. So you're going to be paying 0.5 on $50,000. The $50,000 that you're making in this range. And that means you're going to be paying $25,000 in taxes for income above 50,000.
Okay.
And that means your total tax bill is 31,000. And that means your average tax is going to be 31,000 divided by the 100,000 that you're making.
So you just multiply the amount that they are making in that tax bracket by the percent and then add them all up?
And add them all up.
Okay.
And that gives you your average tax rate. And if you think about it, you'd say, well, if you think, the first thing to say is, well, now wait a second, does that give me the right tax bill? How much they have to pay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would give you the right tax bill. Then you say, how do I get the average tax rate from the tax bill? Is I divide the total tax bill by the total income.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Josh, who's next?
It should be Dylan, who asked, can you explain regulatory capture?
Yes. Regulatory capture.
My bad.
Dylan, is that a fair characterization of your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Regulatory capture happens when you have a regulatory agency that is supposed to oversee the activities of a particular group or an industry. And there's kind of two different categories of these. The kind of the industrial version of that is, back in the 1930s, they regulated a bunch of industries. And those industries included airlines and trucking and pipelines and a whole bunch of other things. And here in Texas, a great example of this is the Texas Railroad Commission regulating the oil industry. And that came out of, it also happened during the 1930s and 20s is when that regulation developed. What happens then is you have a relatively concentrated group of people who really care about the regulation. So if you say, you know, let's think about how much you care about how the Texas Railroad Commission behaves, or anybody that's in class here cares about how the Railroad Commission behaves, compared to how much Exxon cares about how the Railroad Commission behaves. And what happens is the regulated industry, the benefits and costs of regulation are concentrated in a small group of people. It might be a small group of firms or just a smaller group of people, as compared to the benefits of regulation accrue to the populace at large. And what happens is you often get regulatory capture. This idea was put forth by George Stigler and Richard Posner from the University of Chicago. And basically what they said was the regulatory agency can easily become the pawn of the regulated industry. So if you look back when they regulated airlines, they basically did whatever the airlines wanted them to do. Another example of regulatory capture, which is not quite as politically popular to talk about, is the regulation of the professions. So you might think that we regulate doctors and to some extent attorneys in terms of how many of them we let into practice, and the Bar Association and nursing and different things like that, hospital regulation. So one of the things that we require if you want to build a new hospital is we've historically required in Texas a certificate of need. And what that means is that a government agency has to say that it's a good idea to build a new hospital, as opposed to somebody wants to build a new hospital. Why can't they just go build it? As long as it's a safe hospital and there's a demand for it. And what happens is these people who are regulated, the benefits, the economic effect of the regulation is concentrated in a small group of people. And the costs of the regulation, so you'd say, well, what is the cost of having a government agency say that we can only have a certain number of doctors? And by the way, a government agency does say that. You know, can we only have a certain number of doctors? Well, the cost is you don't have as much medical care readily available. If they don't build new hospitals, then existing hospitals make a lot more money. But the general populace does not become as well informed. And so the regulated industry has a disproportionate effect on how regulation actually evolves over time.
Could you say that another example could be the FDA, or would you not include that as an example?
In principle, you might think that. I don't. I wrote my dissertation on the pharmaceutical industry, and I've been studying pharmaceuticals all of my career. In general, the FDA does a really good job. And part of it is where the regulatory capture becomes a really big problem is what are called price regulation and entry regulation. So if you say and think of price regulation and entry regulation, let's think of taxi cabs in New York City, okay? The taxi cab agency says how many cabs can be out there. They issue the medallions, they certify the cabs, and they also set the fares, okay? What the FDA does is something, and by the way, if you say, well, why is that particularly susceptible to capture? And the reason for that is, if you say, I'm a seller, what do I want? Well, I don't want there to be very many other sellers, and I want my prices to be high.
Could you potentially then, with the FDA specifically, like with GMO products or like their quote unquote like organic type of marketing? Do you know what I'm talking about or no?
I'm not familiar with your GMO products. I don't know what you mean by that. What they do. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So basically, when if you want your product to be like quote unquote GMO free or whatever, you do have to, I don't know if you have to pay the FDA, but you do have to pay somebody for that type of, I guess, right.
What do you mean? What do you mean by the phrase GMO?
Like on food.
And what is GMO? You're using an acronym that I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, 1 second.
It means like genetically modified foods. Yeah.
Okay. You're talking you're talking about food regulation. And
yes, sir.
I'm much less familiar with food regulation and the various categories. Basically, what I'm talking about is pharmaceutical regulation, which is the bulk.
Okay.
Pharmaceuticals, if you say, what does the FDA do with pharmaceuticals? And it's the same thing that they're doing, and all of you know about this right now because of COVID. You say, what's the FDA doing? Well, what they're doing is they are requiring that there be double-blind studies that determine that a product is safe and effective in its intended uses. Okay, so what you want to do, and so, by the way, guys, you're seeing a lot of stuff on COVID that is observational studies. So when you see somebody went out, like WHO went out recently and they did an observational study on remdesivir, and they came back with the conclusion that it doesn't work very well. And the answer is you can't tell anything from that study. It doesn't mean anything. And the reason is if you don't do random assignments So you go in and you take a group of people and you say, you guys are on this side of the study and you guys are on this side of the study. If you don't do that, when you're done, you don't have anything. So you have to have random assignments. And the FDA basically says that we have to have scientific evidence that a product works and that it is effective in all of its intended uses. If you look at GMOs and categorization of foods, is it possible that that category of the kinds of things the FDA does is susceptible to capture? My answer to that would be, well, that's possible, because that's a very different kind of thing than what the FDA is doing with drugs.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. By the way, if you're going to ask a question, please turn on your camera. Josh, who's next?
It should be Mr. Santiago.
Oh, yes. Hello, sir. I have a question on like the difference between like adding vertically and adding horizontally, like for public and private goods, and how they look in like graphing wise.
So let's start with a private good. And I know as I stand up, you can't see my head, and that's just the limitation of doing it this way. Sorry. We have person one, and person one has a demand for a product which I'm going to call D1. And person two has a demand for the product which I'll call D2. And I have a price, which I'll start out with P1. And I say, all right, so how many units does person one want to buy at price P1? And they want to buy Q1 units. And person two wants to buy Q2 units. And then I say, how many units do people want to buy in the market? Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this number and this number at this price. I'm going to say at the market level, the demand curve is going to go through this point, which is Q1 plus Q2. And that's called horizontal summation. Okay? And the reason is, when this person buys the good, this is the value they place on the good, but these units don't impact this person at all because they can't consume it. Think of it as a pizza. So this is how many pizzas do you want to buy? Well, this person wants to buy and presumably eat this number of pizzas. This person wants to buy and presumably eat this number of pizzas. And so together they want and they're willing to pay a price P1 to get that many pizzas.
Sorry.
Yes, Matthew?
This is for private goods, right?
He asked about horizontal and vertical summation. This is horizontal summation. And yes, it applies to private goods.
Okay.
Okay. Now, vertical summation is we have the same setup. Okay. Now, remember that the height of the demand curve here is equal to willingness to pay. It's also equal to value. Okay. How much value the consumer places on that item. And we could go through some logic here and you'd figure it out. But basically, if you're willing to pay P1 to get this unit, then this unit is more valuable to you than anything else than you could get with your P1. And that's why willingness to pay is equal to value. Now, if we did And now what I'm going to do so the example works better is I'm going to say, well, we're going to consider, well, no, I'll draw a new diagram so I won't confuse people. If you have a public good, and now we say, how much are you willing to pay, is person one willing to pay for various units? And you can think of a park, or you can think of police protection, or you can think of roads. You can think of different things where you consume them. The difference between a public good and a private good is with a public good, is I consume more of it, at least within limits. It doesn't affect your ability to consume it. Okay? So now let's consider the price P1, and we'll look at Q1, and this person one is willing to pay P1 dollars to get that one unit, to get that extra unit, okay, at the quantity Q1.
Okay.
Person two, and now I'm going to consider that same unit. Person two is willing to pay, well, let's call this now P2, which might be different. It might not be the same price that person one is willing to pay. For now, notice the quantities are the same. Up here, the prices are the same, but the quantities are different. Down here, we're looking at the same unit. We're saying, how much are people willing to pay for these different units? And now you say, if Joe is willing to pay P1 dollars to get this unit of public good, and if Alice is willing to pay P2 dollars to get that same unit, then what's that unit worth to the two of them? And the answer is, if I come over here and I say, well, that Q1 unit, it's worth, this is the P1 that Joe's willing to pay to get it, and P2 is, this is P2 plus P1, and Alice is willing to pitch in P2 dollars. And so the combined value is they're willing to pay P2 plus P1 dollars for this unit. And that's because a public good is something that can have value to multiple people, and one person's use of that public good does not affect the consumption of the other person.
Okay.
Okay? And that's vertical summation.
Thank you.
So I add up the values that they're each willing to pay for the item.
Okay, but with a public good, isn't a public good, wouldn't it be the same price?
Well, no, he's asking, he asked about vertical summation.
Okay.
You're asking a different question. And
Okay.
whatever different question you have in mind would have a different answer than this question about vertical summation.
Okay.
Josh, who's next?
It should be Grace Tubbs.
Grace?
Okay, yes. So I had a question. I just was wondering if we could go over how to calculate producer and consumer surplus and also deadweight loss on a graph, and how to
Sure.
be able to tell what that is.
So I'm gonna do this a little bit differently than Dr. Muir. The math is the same. I'm gonna write down the demand and supply curves in a different way than he does. Because it fits better with the way we draw the graph. Let's just say that's a demand curve. And if that's the demand curve, then we have this is going to be 100, this is going to be 100, and then I have a supply curve, and let's just say the supply curve is equal to that, 10 plus 2Q. And that means it's going to start here at 10, and it's going to have twice the slope of that demand curve, and they'll intersect here. So then the question is, where's that intersection at? In order to determine that, I set demand equal to supply. And you can do this, your junior high teacher taught you 4 different ways to do it. I'm going to do it by setting them equal to each other. That's going to give me 100 minus Q is equal to 10 plus 2Q. And that's going to give me that Q is equal to 30 when you solve that out. And that means this is Q. I plug the 30 back into either one of these curves, okay, and I'm going to get a price here of 70. So now, what is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus measures the difference between the value that consumers place on an item minus the cost. Okay, and their cost is just the price. Sometimes there's other costs, but in most markets, it's just a price. So what that means is their value is defined by this demand curve, because we already talked about how the demand curve represents willingness to pay, and that is equal to value. So I need to know what's the gap here between value and cost, and so that gives me this triangle up here. So I need to know how big that triangle is. And that triangle is 100 minus 70. That's the height. It's got a base of 30. And then since it's a triangle, I divide by 2. Well, 30 times 30 is 900. So if I just took this 100 minus 70 is 30 times 30 is 900 times a half, and that's equal to 450. Are you with me, Grace?
Yes, I'm following.
Okay. Now, this one is the same principle, except rather than doing value minus cost for producer surplus, what I want to do is I want to do price minus opportunity cost. What the seller has to give up to get that item. And when I introduced supply to you 3 weeks ago, I said that the height of the supply curve represents the opportunity cost, because the seller won't sell it. If he's offered a slightly less than the opportunity cost, he'll refuse to sell the unit. But as soon as price is equal to the opportunity cost, he'll sell it. And that means that this is not only a willingness to sell curve, it also equals opportunity cost, or what the seller gives up. So what does a seller receive from selling an item? Well, he receives the price. And then I want to subtract out opportunity cost, and that means I'm going to get that triangle right there. So now remember, this is 10. So I've got 60. It's a triangle that's 60 high, the difference between 70 and 10, and it's 30 wide. Okay, so I do 70 minus 10 times 30 times 1/2. Oh, that's equal to 900. Now let me tell you a trick. Notice this is twice as big as this. And the reason it's twice as big is because the slope of the supply curve is twice, in absolute value, it's twice as large as the slope of the demand curve. So if I want to say what percentage of this, and it's just a way of checking your math. You go through this math and you say, oh, did I make a mistake? You say, well, depending on the relative slopes of demand and supply. So if they both had a slope of 1, like when Professor Muir was showing you how to do some of these calculations, they both had a slope of 1, then you'd say, well, consumer and producer surplus are going to be equal to each other. So that's the math, though, of how you calculate that and why you use that particular math. Got it?
Okay, yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Josh, who's next?
Whoever has a question can go ahead because no one's raised their hand or said anything.
Can so I'm confused on how to get the total social opportunity cost at equilibrium price.
You're echoing, and I'm having a
Um,
very,
Over the total social opportunity cost at equilibrium and how to get it, and the total social value to consumers at equilibrium.
okay. You want the social opportunity cost of producing a good,
Yes, the total social opportunity cost.
of producing a private good? Is there some particular kind of good that you were asking about?
So it's just asking, it's saying the market is initially in equilibrium of price of 50 and quantity of 80. Now suppose producers decide to cut output to 40 in order to raise the price of 18. What is the total social opportunity cost at the equilibrium price of 15?
Of the collusion price. Okay. So I didn't hear the exact parameters that you had, but let me show you how to answer that question, and just as the general answer. Okay. So you start out in an equilibrium here. This is a competitive equilibrium. I'm going to write it as PC and QC. And if the producers, did you say they were initially producing at 50?
The market is initially in equilibrium at a price of 15 and a quantity of 80. Oh, it's 15, I'm sorry. 15.
50? 15?
15? Yes, I'm sorry.
It won't matter. And then they cut output to,
Output to 40 in order to raise the price to 18.
okay. Now, so there's a very specific answer to this question, but I want you to understand kind of the general answer, because if I can teach you, take an extra minute and teach you the general way to approach a problem like this. So what they've done is, remember that before, when they started out, the equilibrium involved this much consumer surplus. It also involved this much producer surplus. And this fits in nicely because it's exactly what we did just a minute ago. So it's the same kind of a problem. Now you say, what happens if the price goes up to 18? Well, if the price goes up to 18, then what happens is in equilibrium, fewer people are going to buy the item. So if I raise the price up to 18, then the units between 40 and 80, these are no longer produced. Okay? So the producers were making them before, and what you say, well, why would they not produce these items? Because, by the way, notice they're making surplus on those items. Well, why would they not? Well, because they want to raise the price. If they cut output to 40, then they can make an extra $3 on each one of those 40 units. And they're going to end up making more money here. So what's the extra they're making? The extra they're making on the 40 units they're continuing to sell is this red area. And they're taking it away from consumers. You say, can I give you any examples of a company that does that kind of thing? And the answer is Apple. They just introduced the iPhone 12. I don't know what it's selling for, but it is selling for a very high price. Okay? And that extra is they're extracting that from consumers. Do you say, well, with that high price, then some units won't be sold. And that's these units. okay? And I don't have the shape of the demand and supply curves here to give you the mathematical answer, but this is what is lost. Okay? And that is the social opportunity cost and let's assume these, well, I have to be really careful. This number here is the one I don't have, and I'm going to call it X. Okay? And what I want to do is I'm going to use this height and I can calculate the area of that triangle right there. Okay? So, and I'm going to do that. You do it in 2 steps. I calculate the area of this piece of it. Then I can calculate the area of that piece of it. And if the 2 curves have the same slope, I can calculate the whole thing and then divide by 2. But it depends on the problem as to which one you want to do mathematically there. But so this is the social opportunity cost of reducing output from 80 to 40. And then that enables the consumers to raise prices and charge the consumer more. And their producer surplus goes up by this amount minus that amount. And consumers, let me give you a clean picture. If you say, what did consumers lose? Well, consumers, when we started out, we were in this competitive equilibrium. And now we're down to 40 units. Consumers have lost this. They're losing that because of higher prices on the units they're continuing to buy. And they're also losing this because now these units between 40 and 80 are no longer being produced and sold.
Okay, yes, it makes more sense. Thank you.
Sure.
So deadweight loss and consumer surplus, or the loss and consumer surplus occasionally overlap. It's not one or the other.
The loss of consumer well, notice here, there's 2 types of loss of consumer surplus. One from higher prices, and this goes to producers. So this is not lost to the economy.
Right, that's just essentially transferred.
It's a form of a transfer. You can think of it that way. Then deadweight loss is also a form of why consumer surplus falls here, but it's in a different category.
Okay.
Okay, and it's the part that's associated with inefficiency.
Okay.
Okay. Do you remember Dr. Meir telling you in one of the videos that you can't tax corporations in the sense of incidence can't be on the corporation, it has to be on people?
Right, the people in the corporation.
People end up paying for everything.
Right.
So if you say, well, so who are the producers here? And you say, well, those are big corporations. Are you sure? It might be a mom and pop operation.
Right.
And it's a little old lady selling cookies. And so don't have some idea that producers or consumers, economists don't care whether it's producer surplus or consumer surplus. What we care about is this piece right here. And
Okay.
what is this piece? This piece is the inefficiency, and I'll show you this. Well, I'll use this one. It's well done. We're not producing units where the value is greater than the opportunity cost.
Right.
And
so it's the inefficiency in the
portion
economy.
of the loss of consumer surplus that's associated with that. But notice also, remember there I said when I was drawing that area, let me put this other piece of that rectangle, that triangle in there. This red area was part of producer surplus in the original equilibrium.
Right, and now that's lost as well.
That's lost as well. And you say, well, why would the producer give up not produce units where he's making surplus? Oh, well, because he makes more by charging this higher rectangle And you can show the rectangle will always be bigger than that triangle.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Next person should be Jace Ratley.
Jace?
So I was going to ask about deadweight loss, but we just got into that, I think. So are you saying in that instance, though, that the part that's is equal to the deadweight loss or social opportunity cost?
You're cutting in and out.
Okay, hold on a second.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you much better.
Oh my gosh. Can I?
I didn't hear anything. I heard something about deadweight loss.
I know. Can I type it?
Yeah, now it sounds like you're a drunk talking into your beer. So move that. Let's get rid of the earphone or whatever you're talking into. And
What about now?
I can hear you fine.
You can hear me fine?
I can hear
I
you
can't.
fine.
Let me turn you up. I can't hear you now.
Well, no, here's the way we can do it. You
Okay.
ask your question.
Okay, I can hear you now.
You ask your question and then put that hearing aid or hearing piece back in, and then you can hear me better when I'm
Okay.
answering.
So I had a question about deadweight loss, but I'm pretty sure you just answered it. I was basically just going to ask if the portion that you said was no longer produced, is that the deadweight loss? And is that also
That's what causes the deadweight loss.
okay? So when you no longer produce, it causes the deadweight loss. But is the deadweight loss equal to the social opportunity cost?
Yes.
Okay.
So the opportunity cost, you say, what did society give up in order to get this extra producer surplus up here? Well, you'd say we want to measure the value of what society lost. And what did society lose? It lost this.
Mm-hmm.
You say, what about that area under the supply curve? Why isn't that a part of it? Well, so I know you guys had great enthusiasm about the tacos and enchiladas that we talked about a month ago or 5 weeks ago. Let's talk about tacos and enchiladas. This is the taco market. And now I pass a law in College Station, and I say that there is only one taco manufacturer allowed in College Station. And so what they're going to do is they're going to cut output, they're going to raise prices. And you say, well, what happens to the meat and the tortillas? Oh, they go into enchilada production. Okay, so they're not lost. The value of what can be produced with that, and you say that height of the supply curve is opportunity cost, but it's also equal to the value of the alternative. And if you go back and study that stuff we did, you'll figure out that that's exactly right. So it's the value of the alternative. So what did society lose when prices went up and quantity was cut? The difference between the value of this item and the value of the alternative that now gets produced instead. Make sense to you, Jace?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay.
And the reason why the producers will do that is because they can give up that small amount to gain the larger amount that they get from the consumers.
Yeah, they give this up, this little piece, this red piece down here,
To give the big rectangle.
to get this big rectangle up here.
Makes sense.
Okay.
All right, the next person should be Ann Stewart.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, I don't have a question anymore because I have to share my screen. It was one of the quiz questions. I have it pulled up, but I'm not able to share my screen, so I don't have a question anymore, but thank you.
You're welcome. And what I would encourage you to do is figure out a way to articulate it, because you need to understand what is being asked, because then the answer will help you a lot more when you get into the exam. But you do what you need to do. Josh, who's next?
Should be Mary Freeman.
Hi, sorry, I have another question. I was wondering if we could please go over like tax policy, specifically marginal and average tax rate, and also please like private and social cost and benefit, like in regards to graphing and stuff?
Wait, we did tax average and marginal tax rates as the first question.
Oh,
You're
I
not-
must have. I was having trouble. I couldn't find the link of where to
Okay.
log on.
So let me tell you how I handle this stuff. I'm happy to answer a question a second time, but I'm not happy to have everybody else wait while that's done. We're going to go till 5. If
Okay.
questions run out before we get to 5, ask your question again at that time.
Okay.
That
Thank
way
you very
we go through new material, and I hope that's not too inconvenient for you.
Not at all. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So
Josh,
now we're to whoever has a question can just go ahead.
oh, well then, Mary. Well, wait, let's wait. So does somebody else have a question they want to ask? If you do,
Yeah, question.
okay, go ahead. Who?
Me, I think.
Okay.
When it's similar to taxes, but like, I know, like, my question is, how do you find out through the graph who pays most of the tax?
All right. So when Professor Muir did this in the video, he went through a series of calculations. And I'm going to try to do it for you in a slightly different way. We're going to be doing exactly the same thing, but I'm not going to have you concentrate as much on the numbers as to what's changing.
Okay.
So we start out here, and we have a market. And here's a supply curve, and here's a demand curve, and we're initially in equilibrium, and I'm going to label that equilibrium PC and QC. Okay? Now, the government comes in and they levy a tax. And they're going to levy the tax the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to say they're going to levy it on producers. And basically what they say to the producers, if you're going to produce an item, for every item you sell, you're going to have to give us $1. Okay?
Mhm.
And so that's a tax of $1, and that's going to shift this supply curve up. And that means we're going to get a new equilibrium quantity, because producers now, they have to pay the blue opportunity cost, and then they also have to pay $1. So if you say, what does it cost a producer to make a unit? Well, it costs them, they have to pay the opportunity cost, so they buy all the materials and everything they need to make the item, plus then they turn around and have to give the government $1. So their cost of making an item is now going to be the red supply line, and I'm going to label that ST. Now, who is going to end up paying the tax? Well, because of the way I've constructed the example, the firms that are selling, they're the ones that write the checks to the government. Now you'd say, yeah, but who's really paying it? Okay. So now let's look and let's say, well, what is going to be the new price? And the new price is going to be PT, which is the price when there's a tax. And then you're going to say, now, but what is the revenue to the producers? Because remember, yes, consumers pay PT, but the producers only get a keep, this amount right here. And so this is the price that the producers receive.
Okay.
Now, who effectively paid the tax? Well, consumers are paying a portion of the tax, and you figure out the consumer's portion by taking PT minus PC. That's what they were paying before. They're paying PC before, they're paying PT now, and they're buying QT units. That's what consumers are paying. producers are receiving PP, okay, that amount right there, because our government's taken the gap. And before they were getting PC, and multiply by QT. And if you looked at this, Santiago, you'd say, well, I can't tell which one's bigger. The reason you can't is the demand and supply curves kind of have a similar slope. Okay, I tried to make the supply curve a little steeper, but I didn't do a very good job of it. So now, does everybody have this down? Because make sure you write it down, because I'm going to erase it, and then I'm going to draw 2 new curves where you can see, oh, it goes this way in this situation, it goes that way in the other situation. So let's do it. What if we have a really steep supply curve and a pretty flat demand curve? Okay, now we're going to do the same kind of a tax. We're going to levy a tax. But now notice what's happening. This is PC, this is PT, and this is PP. Notice that producers end up paying much more of the tax.
Okay.
And you can think of it as they're not very willing to change in response to price changes. They kind of keep doing what they were doing before because their supply curve is very inelastic, meaning it's very steep. Okay?
So whoever has the more inelastic curve pays more of the tax?
Yeah, so let's confirm that.
Okay.
So let's go over here and we're going to draw a new one. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a very steep demand curve and a relatively flat supply curve. Okay? I have my PP here. And since we're going to, notice I didn't put quantities down here because it doesn't really help you. Actually, I didn't get that flat enough. Okay. Now, when I levy the tax, you'll see that this gap is smaller, and because the demand curve is steep, this piece is going to be bigger than this piece.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's the relative elasticity of the demand and supply curves.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, the next person should be Malachi.
I just had a question over finding like the optimal amount of a good based on the information from a table, and like the table would have, I guess, the marginal benefit for each person.
I don't know how to answer. You're going to have to give me a more complete question.
Okay, I'll try and look up an example, and I'll come back later.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not quite sure what you're asking, and I can guess, but I could easily guess wrong.
Next person should be Justine Jordan.
Hello. So I have a question about, in lesson 8.6, we made like this little like 4x4 table thing with like excludable, non-excludable, rival, and non-rival. I just want to know if you could like go through each one and like verbally, because like I'm like verbal. I don't know. I just want to like hear you explain it.
Okay. So rival and non-rival and excludable and non-excludable, is that what you're asking about?
Yes. In that table.
Well, I didn't construct that table, and I'm not a public finance person, so I'm not sure I've ever seen that table. I'm pretty sure I can answer your question, but you're going to have to give me more information than
Okay.
that.
Okay, so like for instance, I'll just show it to you. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, well, let me walk up there. Just keep it where it's at.
Okay.
So not excludable and non-excludable, and rival and non-rival. All right. So what's your question about that?
I just want to know if you could just like go over it again and just explain it so that I can write it down, and if I have a question, because I know when I was looking over the video, I had questions. So I just want to know if, like, when you go over it, if that'll spark it back up.
Yeah, Professor Muir likes that kind of stuff, that kind of categorization, and I'm not a fan, but that's okay. So let's think about public goods and private goods and common property goods and I believe the other category is club goods, and I don't know. So public goods are non-rival and they're non-excludable. Okay? Because if I think of it, the example I like to use about that is police protection. Let's just say I decide my neighborhood isn't safe enough, and so I hire a policeman or private security to stand outside my door. Well, my neighbor probably benefits from that.
Right.
People come by and they think, oh, maybe this is not the best place to break and enter, or something like that. Okay.
Okay.
So public goods are non-excludable, and they're not rivalrous, because a person consuming more of a public good does not use it up. There is no using up associated with a public good, a pure public good. Private goods are not, they are excludable, and I believe you would say those are rivalrous. Because if I consume more of a private good, there's less left for anybody else to consume. And I can exclude you from using it. I buy a pizza and I eat it and you don't get any. Okay? Common property resources, and those are by the way, the three main categories. There is this thing of club goods, and I've never messed around with club goods in my life. Common property resources, which I've spent a lot of time with, are things that they can be commonly owned and used. But if one person uses more of a common property resource, there is less of it available for everybody else to use. So if you said, one of the things that economists have pushed very hard is you need to, for these types of goods, both of these, you need to assign property rights. Because the commons, these are excludable. And by the way, if you say, why do we call them common property resources? Well, the classic example of a common property resource is a common in a village. And a common is something where everybody could send their cattle in and you can graze. Okay? But it is excludable in principle, because all I have to do is I have to build a fence around it. And now people can. And if you say, so something you guys don't know about me is I spent 5 years when I was a kid growing up in Ethiopia. And I actually care a lot about development in Africa. And if you say, what is the biggest single obstacle to development, for example, in Ethiopia? And it's that they have too many common property resources. They regard excludable resources as basically tribal property. So there's the common, they're commonly owned, and that means you get overuse and you get overgrazing and you don't get efficient use of resources. The other great example of it is fisheries. So, you know, if you have in the ocean, you know, people can go in and they can overfish, and that, you know, fishing is great. You're just harvesting the fish. But if you do too much of it, what happens is you impact the population. Public goods are, I've already explained. Private goods, we've talked about, and I'm not 100% sure about club goods because I never think about them.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This is a good breakdown.
You're welcome.
So whoever has a question can go ahead.
Could you go over how tariffs can affect the market?
How tariffs?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So when Professor Muir talked about tariffs, he did it in a very simple setting. And what he had was, he had that there's a domestic demand, domestic supply, and then he had a world supply that was horizontal. So this is world supply. And basically the idea is that you can buy, at this price, you can buy as much of the good as you want. And what it means is these areas are going to be a lot simpler than if I had an upward sloping supply curve for the world. So since this is what he did in the video, this is what I'm going to stick with, rather than making it more complicated. So now and the equilibrium is going to be that when you have a perfectly tradable good like this, the domestic price is going to have to be the world price. Okay, because you can go out and buy all you want on the world market. Okay, and this is not too far different than what we see in the oil market. It's a little bit different because there's different grades of crude oil, but it's approximately right. So there is a world price. And so if you say, all right, so now we have tariffs. So the equilibrium is going to be this. I didn't finish describing the equilibrium. And this is going to be the supply that is domestic. This is going to be the quantity demanded and purchased. And then you say, what's the difference between the two? And the answer is this piece right here are imports. Okay, everybody with me?
Okay.
Now, if we have a tariff and we put on a tariff, then what we're basically saying is that if you want to buy from a world supplier, you're going to have to pay that world supply price plus the tariff. Okay, so the price of all goods is going to go up by the amount of the tariff.
Right.
Okay, now the new market equilibrium price is going to be the world price plus the tariff. And that's going to cause three things to happen. First thing is because the price is higher, the domestic supply is going to go up. The quantity supply. Okay, so now this is, well, I'll write it in red. This is now SD when there's a tariff. Because the price is higher. Because the domestic producers don't have to pay that tariff. So they're still working off of their original supply curve, and they say, well, consumers can buy, this is the market, now the domestic market price. This is what people are paying for this item, whatever it is. And so now the quantity supplied is going to go up, and there's going to be a benefit to producers equal to this amount right here.
What about the triangle to the right of that?
Oh, we're going to get into lots of stuff.
Oh, okay.
There's multiple steps here. That's why I said there's 3 things that are happening.
Okay.
And I'm describing the first of them. The price is higher. Because it's higher, the domestic supply is going to go up, and that is going to make this much money for the domestic producers. You got that part?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, in addition, well, you might, first of all, you might ask, well, where is well, this money is all coming out of the pockets of consumers. Because let me show you, when you had the old equilibrium, I assume you guys can see this. When we had that old equilibrium, consumers are basically facing a horizontal supply curve. Okay, because I got part of it they're buying from the domestic and so forth, but the consumer's point of view, they just say, no, we're facing this price. And that's all consumer surplus. And so if you say, oh, that consumer surplus triangle went all the way down here and all the way over here. And now there's these chunks of consumer surplus that are different things are happening to them. Okay? Now, so one thing that's happening is domestic supply is going up. Those domestic producers are charging this higher price, and they're making money. And then you have the supply here. This is now this piece here. Okay, this piece is the tariff. Okay, so the world market, if you're going to import here, you're going to have this amount here, and this money is collected by the government because you're going to continue to have imports. You're going to continue to have imports, and this is the quantity of the imports. Right, which is the difference between what the domestic industry is supplying. Say, how did I get that? Well, the domestic industry is supplying this amount right here, and then this is the quantity demanded when there's a tariff. Okay? So all those units, all the way out here, are going to be bought and sold. Okay? But now there's going to be a reduction, and you're going to have a loss, a deadweight social loss. You're going to have a deadweight social loss to the domestic economy equal to that.
What about the area on the other side?
Okay. When Professor Muir did this, he was talking about a deadweight social loss. But this is a loss that's associated with what's going on internationally. So, yes, the 2 blue areas are deadweight social losses, but they are actually happening for very different reasons.
Okay, and the triangle above the red rectangle is not anything, right?
The triangle above the red rectangle.
In the middle of the graph, yes, that.
Now, well, this is, so now stop. When you get confused about this stuff, stop and think for a minute. Okay, just stop and say, all right, so what is this? This is area between the demand curve, right? And the price that consumers pay. Oh, that's consumer surplus.
Okay, gotcha.
And I actually said this quite wrong. These are both deadweight loss, and they're lost to the consumers. Okay.
Even the one on the left is lost to the consumers?
Yeah, it's lost to consumers. I have to think through this. I don't play with these diagrams very often, but yes, it is. Well, I don't. I haven't thought about a tariff in 10 years. but that's, so the consumers are paying higher prices. Okay, so when you think of losses of consumer surplus from a policy, they come from only two places. You're continuing to buy items, but you have to pay higher prices for them. That's all of this. That's this whole long, skinny rectangle, and that includes that.
Okay.
Part of that rectangle goes to domestic producers. Part of it is used to pay the tariff to the government. And then part of it is just lost because the output isn't produced anymore. Okay?
Okay.
And then this area here is for units that are, actually no, this is, I said that wrong. This is because there's a higher opportunity cost associated with producing these units.
That area is?
This area right here.
Okay.
See, before I could produce those units, when they were being produced on the world market, the opportunity cost of producing them was the blue line. Now the opportunity cost of producing them is the supply curve.
Oh.
So now those units are more costly to produce, and that drives down welfare.
Okay. Would you guys ever ask us to calculate what the government is receiving in revenue from the tariff?
We can ask you any question that we've covered.
Oh, okay. Well, how would
Let
you?
me tell you what I do not do in review session. No clues. Okay, no clues. I'm happy to expand your economic knowledge. But the reason I'm so firm on no clues is it's just not fair. You know, you've had all semester to come see me in my office hours, and Peyton, I missed you. I kept thinking, where's Peyton? I keep wishing he'd show up in my office hours, and you haven't shown up yet.
Sorry.
So now to come to the review session and say, now what's going to be on the test? Questions about economics, hard questions.
Understood. But if we were going to calculate that area, you wouldn't include that blue triangle, correct?
Well, it depends on the question you had that was asked. Here, what did I just tell you? And this is a serious part of this. There's some just kind of having fun here, but let's be serious. How did I tell you how to approach what this is and what that is? Stop and think about it. You'll notice I haven't thought about that area in a very long time. Okay. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen this example before of a tariff when you have a horizontal supply curve, world supply. I don't normally teach tariffs that way. I teach them with upward sloping supplies, and it changes things a bit. So what did I do to figure it out? Okay, here's what I did. I said, those units aren't being produced. That's a deadweight loss. These units, consumers were buying before, they were getting surplus from them. And then I said, now this is money that is going to the tariff. And this is, so, and then you have higher prices for the domestic producers, but then you also have that there's an increase in opportunity cost, and that's going to drive down social welfare because it's more costly to use resources to make those units. And you notice I just reasoned my way through it. So what are the gold things that you need to learn? The height of the demand curve is equal to value. Just if I woke you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and says, what's value to consumers? You say the height of the demand curve, and then you go back to sleep. Okay, what's opportunity cost? The height of the supply curve. Okay, what's surplus? The area in between. What divides surplus into producer surplus and consumer surplus? Prices. Because prices are paid by consumers and they're received by producers. Is that always true? No, if there's a tax, then that creates a wedge between the price paid by consumers and the price received by producers. Okay.
Mhm.
Then you say, well, but how do I calculate a particular area? If you want to calculate a particular area, just remember, we're only going to be dealing, we got triangles, we've got rectangles, and we've got trapezoids. Okay. So when that diagram we had up, well, you can take this one. Okay. And if you said, I want to know how to calculate that area, yes, you can remember the formula for a trapezoid, or you can just say, there's a rectangle, I'm calculating that area, and there's a triangle, I'm calculating that area, and add them together.
Okay.
And you just go through it and you do this, because those are the only three math things we're doing, besides solving where demand equals supply.
Okay.
Okay?
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
By the way, just so you know, I will give you this hint. Because of the time constraints, can I ask you to go through a really complicated calculation that's going to take you 2 or 3 minutes to perform? No.
No.
There's 50 questions in 70 minutes. Okay? So it can't be real. It cannot be a really complicated calculation that you have to do.
Okay.
And, you know, yeah, I guess I'm giving something away with that, but I don't think I'm giving away a whole lot.
Thank you for the
You're welcome.
information.
You're welcome. Josh, is anybody's hand up?
No, it's just whoever wants to go ahead and ask a question, go ahead.
All right. Mary, you've been patient. We will, I will answer your question.
Thank you. Could you please cover private and social cost and benefit as well, please?
Private and which one do you
Just
want?
like in regards, I understand them, like the definitions and the meaning, but once we start graphing them is whenever I get a little confused.
Okay. So okay, so now let's go back and talk about just a minute, just to refresh your recollection, because by the way, all this stuff is still in terms of welfare, still on the test. If you said, why is a competitive equilibrium efficient? Why is that quantity? You say, well, it maximizes total surplus. Yeah, but what is total surplus? And remember, this part of the course, we're dealing with value. How much people value things at. So we know that the value of this is the willingness to pay. The supply curve is the opportunity cost, but it is also equal to the value of the alternative. Just like that example I was talking about a minute ago when I was talking about tacos and enchiladas. The resources that are being used to this have an alternative use, and their value in that use is equal to the height of the supply curve. And here's how you know. The producer says, well, I'm going to have to give up a certain amount of some other good to make this one. And how much could I sell that for? And whatever price. So he takes the price and multiplies it times the physical units that he's giving up. And if all that's true, then you say, well, what is that price? Well, it's how much a consumer would be willing to pay for that item. Oh, it's the value of that other item too. It's not just opportunity cost, it's the value of the other item. Okay? So now, you say, what's going on here? We have the value of this item compared to the value of the other item. And if the value of this item is bigger than the value of the other item, we want to produce this item. And we're going to go that way. Now, how does externalities affect that? You say, well, most of the time when we're making things, we just make them. And they have, you know, I'm making enchiladas, and I'm making tortillas. I have tortillas, and I have spices, and I have hamburger meat, and my time and cost and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes when I make things, it creates an external cost. So that, or when I consume things, and you know, Professor Muir used an example of your roommate plays loud music, and that's fine. I think when I first learned about this, it was taught to me as, well, you have a laundry, okay, and the laundry, and they hang the clothes outside, and you have a factory next door, and it puts smoke out into the air, and the smoke gets on the clothes. And so now it's costly. As you produce more of that item, it puts smoke in the air, then it raises the cost of clothes, of keeping the clothes clean.
Right.
As you are shipping stuff around the country in trucks, you're raising the congestion cost on our roads.
Right.
So if you say we're gonna ship stuff up from Mexico to the United States, and you say, well, do you really want to drive on I-35 ever again? Because all those trucks that are out there, and they are certainly inconvenient. And what it is doing is it's raising the cost because it creates this external cost.
Right.
Now, so this cost here is the external cost. When I do more of whatever it is, it impacts the welfare of others. And we're going to measure that by saying, how much would they pay to avoid it? Okay? How much would they pay to avoid that cost? Then you'd say, so now part of the cost of making this item is I have to have all of these resources that are used in actually making the item measured by the height of the original supply curve. And then I have to factor in the value of that externality. And just like down here, when I'm saying this is value, this external cost, it's actually the value that people would place on it.
Wouldn't that be where the Pigovian tax and subsidies come in to account for that extra cost?
They can, in principle. Okay. Professor Muir is a public economist, and he thinks that Pigovian taxes actually exist. I'm an industrial organization economist, and I've never seen a Pigovian tax in my life. Pigovian, and let me tell you what the problem is. In principle, so let me talk about principles. In principle, you say, if I can find this tax, so I'm going to charge this tax. And this is the tax rate. Okay? That's the Pigovian tax rate. The Pigovian tax rate will get me to the efficient allocation.
Right.
Could it ever happen? How do you think that could ever happen? See, the beauty of this equilibrium is nobody needs to know how much people value anything. It's completely decentralized. So now you say, so how much would you be willing to pay to avoid the externality? How are we going to find out? Well, we're going to do a poll. So now you say, how are we going to do this poll? Well, let's say, how much are the national parks worth? Because they create a positive externality. And you do a survey, and people say, oh, those parks are worth hundreds of dollars to me. And then you go around and you say, here, how much are you willing to put in the hat? and it's going to go to improving the national parks. Well, I didn't know you're talking about real money.
Right.
And the answer is 50 cents. So it's very hard to determine the magnitudes here. And even when you can determine the magnitudes, it's very, very difficult politically to implement them.
Right.
So if you wanted to efficiently handle pollution and global warming, if you said, well, no, we want to get that problem under control, do a carbon tax. And do a carbon tax and do it and have the permits to emit carbon be fully transferable. So you can buy and sell them, okay?
Okay.
And 20 years ago, they actually talked about it for a while, and they figured out it was a political non-starter because politics just gets in the way. And, you know, it's like in the spring, I was really, really frustrated because I couldn't figure out a lot of things about COVID that I wanted to know. And the reason I couldn't figure them out is that everybody out there was lying. And I'm not talking about the Democrats were lying or the Republicans were lying. I'm talking about everybody was lying, and the media was lying because they all had this slant. And so there's this political agenda. And so is a Pagovian tax in my world something that's politically possible ever? No, it's a great idea. It's a really great idea.
But it's
But the
unrealistic.
political economy makes it impossible.
Okay.
So, but yes, that's a Pagovian tax. And more important, this is the efficient equilibrium. I'll just label it QE. That's the efficient equilibrium. And you want to have ways, and if you can find a group that internalizes the externality, and then you can transfer that, you can assign property rights and you can get to the efficient solution, and that's what Ronald Coase was talking about.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
And by the
That
way,
makes sense.
Coase would tell you, or well, he's not anymore, he's not with us anymore, but he told me personally, you know, so we could talk about doing Coasean reassignment of property rights. Does that have, so when he wrote his paper for which he won the Nobel Prize, he said, you can assign property rights and it doesn't matter who you assign them to if there are no transactions costs. But if there are transactions costs, then it's always about who you assign them to.
Right.
And I said, so which version of your theorem is the right one? And he said, oh, the one with transactions costs. The other one's just a straw man. So can you, with contracting, get to this efficient equilibrium? And the answer is no. You have to be much more pragmatic. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Next question.
Shelby, you can ask your question. Just go ahead and read the question if you have it.
Okay, hi, can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me or no?
I can hear you.
Oh, cool. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna read it. It's off the like sample test. It's number 4. So it says sugar in the United States is about twice as expensive as it is in other countries due to an import quantity restrictions, costing the average American about $10 more per year and providing the average sugar farmer with nearly $3 million in additional revenue. Which concept best explains this situation? And the answer it said was the public choice theory of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. And I was wondering if you could just go over like kind of what that means. I was very confident in my wrong answer, and it is not the right answer. And so, yeah.
What was your answer?
I picked, let me go back to it. I picked, I'm embarrassed. I picked the role of supply and demand in determining equilibrium prices.
Okay. Here's why it's not the law of supply and demand creating equilibrium prices. Is you have government action, and you would say, what is it? So remember, I don't know, were you here at the start of the session?
I've been kind of in and out. I'm technically at work, but we're allowed to do
That's
homework.
fine. No, it's not a problem. I'm just I want to refer back to something we covered earlier.
I can watch it later though. Somebody
Somebody asked me about the capture theory of regulation. And this is exactly the same stuff. So you say, why is it that certain regulated industries, the regulators do what the regulated firm wants done? And the reason is you have very concentrated benefits and very diffuse, not diffuse, you have diffuse costs. Diffuse costs. Okay, so now let's think about, you end up paying, to the extent that you eat any sugar at all, you end up paying for those sugar tariffs, and you don't care. I happen to know a person whose father-in-law is a sugar farmer, and he makes millions of dollars a year on these tariffs. And he gets checks from the government that are associated with it, and it's worth a lot of money to him, and he cares a lot. And you know what he does with a part of that money is he gives it to political candidates, and what do those political candidates do? They support the tariffs. And so, Dr. Muir was talking to you about raisins, and that you have higher prices in the United States, and you have, I don't know, I haven't kept up with milk price supports, but the last I looked, milk price supports, the government artificially has a higher price of milk than the market equilibrium price. And you say, why? Because dairy farmers care a lot. And if dairy farmers lose their milk price supports, do you know what they're going to do? They're going to vote out any senator that doesn't support them. But even if the senator did support them and the milk price supports were voted out, they're going to still vote against him in the next election, because they said he should have politicked, he should have made deals with his friends, and they should have managed to keep those milk price supports, because we know that God really wants there to be milk price supports, and God wants there to be sugar supports, and they really look at it that way. So what you have is you have concentrated benefits and very diffuse costs, and that explains both things like sugar price supports, and it also explains the capture theory of regulation and other public choice kinds of issues. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. When you see government policies of that type, and you kind of have it, you say, where did that come from? The first question you should ask yourself is, who benefits? And who does it hurt? And what you'll find is who benefits is often a concentrated small group of people, and who does it hurt? It hurts a bunch of people, but only a little bit.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Logan Ramirez.
Hi. So I had a question on the exam version as well. Number 35. Suppose that the demand for wine is elastic and that initially 5 million bottles of wine are produced and consumed. If the government imposes a tax of $2 per bottle, the government will collect a certain amount of tax, is what the question is asking.
No, wait. The demand for wine is elastic. Okay.
Yes.
And there's a tax of $2 a bottle on wine.
Yes.
And the rest of it?
5 million bottles of wine are produced and consumed.
Okay.
So the question is asking how much in taxes will the government collect?
Well, it's less than 10 million. Do you understand why?
No, I was wondering if you could work out the math portion.
Well, you haven't given me enough information to solve a math problem, but I can show you what's going on in the part of the question you've asked so far. You said the demand for wine is elastic, which means it's relatively flat. And you said we started and we're at 5 million. And you don't say what this price is, but you say we're going to raise the price by $2. Okay. So we're going to drive the price up. And the question then is, how big is this rectangle here? And we know because it's elastic that the percentage change in quantity, remember, elasticity is this. The percentage change in quantity is greater than the percentage change in price. Where did you go? Oh, there you are. We know that this is greater than 1. Okay? And we know, so we know that, but I don't, without knowing this price, okay, I just know that this thing here is less than 10 million. The reason I know it's less than 10 million is because if it went all the way out here and I included that red area, that's 10 million. So this rectangle here, the blue one's going to be smaller because I don't know that number, and I don't know based on what you just said how to calculate that number.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
So whoever has a question can go ahead.
I found my question from earlier. So,
by the way, we've got time for about 2 more questions. So I'll take this one and I'll take one more after that. We're kind of winding down.
So this was the graph, and I don't know if you can see that or not.
I'm walking over to my screen. So, wow, somebody just moved. All right, so what's on the left-hand column? How's that labeled?
So this first column right here is the quantity of the item. And then these 3 columns right here are the marginal benefits for 3 different people.
Okay.
And basically the question wants us to find the optimal quantity of the product if all 3 of them are going to buy the product.
So the marginal benefits, wait, what type of good is this?
The specific question that I was referring to had a lamp for like a living room for these 3 people.
It's a lamp in a living room, and they all live in the apartment?
Yes, sir.
So you add up the marginal benefits of each one of those units. Just a second. So what you're going to do is you're going to add the benefits. So the first unit has a total marginal benefit. It looks like it's 4, 8, and 5. The second one is a marginal benefit of 3, 6, and 4. And so I add up the marginal benefits of each one of those. And so I get the total benefit of purchasing different numbers of units. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
And it's what we were doing before. Remember when I said you have this value here, this person values the item here, and this person values the item here. And then the total value is, this is person one's value, and this is person two's value. And then I add those. And so the total value to the two is this one plus this one vertically. And that's what you're doing in that table. That's what you're being asked to do.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And then it would be whatever costs when the margin. So if the specific questions had the marginal cost of a good is $9. So whenever those benefits all equaled 9, or
yes,
that's when the efficient number would be reached.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And by the way, just on that table, what you're doing, you have a series of steps in that table. And what you're really doing is person one has a demand curve that looks like this. And person two has a demand curve that looks like this. And what I'm doing is I'm going to come over here. There's a person three in there, but we'll ignore him. And I come over here and you say, well, if this person values at $5 and this value at $10, then together they value it at $15. And the principle in the table and on this graph is the same. I just have to draw it as discrete steps so the individual units stand out. But it's exactly the same thing that's going on. That make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Time for one more question. Okay, well, since there are no more questions, then remember. Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, I have a question. I just wanted to see if anyone else had a question first.
That's fine,
I'm
Mary.
sorry.
You're fine.
Could you just give me a quick overview of the average and of how to calculate average and marginal tax rates? I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I wanted to make sure no one else had a question before I asked.
No, I understand. So let's just say you have the marginal tax rate. It starts out at 0, and Professor Muir just did a one-step at some place you're going to go to 50% tax rate. Well, let's do 2 steps. And let's just say that you're at 0 all the way up to $29,999. But then you have a marginal tax rate at 30,000. Actually, no, we want to do it this way. At $30,001, you have to pay a 30% tax rate. Okay. And then you're going to pay a 50% tax rate beginning at $50,000, 50,001. So this goes all the way up to 50,000. Now, below 30,000, the average and marginal are the same, which is 0. Once you're at 30,000, your marginal tax rate becomes 30%, and these are percents. But your average is still 0 because you haven't earned any money that you actually have to pay taxes on yet. But now let's jump to 50,000. At 50,000, how much in taxes are you going to pay? You're going to pay nothing on the first 30,000, and then you're going to pay 30% on the next 20,000. And so you're going to pay 30% times 20,000, and that's going to give you a total of 6,000 in taxes. the average that you're paying is you're making a total of 50,000. And so the average tax rate is equal to 6,000 divided by 50,000. And that's going to be equal to 12%.
Thank you.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But the marginal tax rate of 50,000 is actually 50%. And your
So it's
margin,
just,
right? Because if I make another dollar, I'm at 50,000. If I make one more dollar, I have to pay 50%, half of that to the government. So
right.
my marginal tax rate is 50%. By the way, if you've ever heard some friends say, or some adults say, I don't want to make more money, it'll push me into a higher tax bracket. They're stupid, okay? Because you're never going to pay more than 100%. And yes, this person at $50,000, if he makes another dollar, he's going to go into a higher tax bracket, but he's still only paying 50 cents. He's better off by 50 cents.
Right.
So it doesn't matter. And the US tax code is set up this way. Okay. Now, what happens if you're making 100,000? Well, if you're making 100,000, then you're going to pay the same amount of taxes on the money between 30 and 50, but then you're going to pay 25,000 on the money you're making above 50,000, which is $50,000. You're going to pay a 50% tax rate. And so that means you're going to pay 25,000 in taxes on that.
Okay.
Plus the 6,000 that you were paying on the money you made in this range. So your
So you're
total
paying
tax bill
31.
is going to be 31K, and your total income is 100K, and so your average tax rate is 31%.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep, it's actually pretty easy. Okay.
Sir.
All right. We are done. Remember that Professor Muir has a review session tomorrow. I believe it's tomorrow evening. He can tell you what club goods are and tell him that I always thought club goods were stupid. So I will, good luck on the test. And remember that we will be available. We're hoping, I just had an email just right 5 minutes before I came in here from the head of IT on the Texas A&M campus talking about the efforts that they are making to make sure that we don't run into the technical difficulties of last time. I'll believe it when I see it. I'm hopeful, but I can't guarantee. But we do have their attention, okay? And as you got that nice apology email from them, which I wrangled out of them, you're going to apologize to my class for this because it's completely unacceptable. Well, I saw somebody had a tweet and they say, you know, when A&M has to get out their tuition bills, they always manage to get out on time. But when it's providing services to the students, like actually being able to take a test, A&M IT can't seem to get that right, which I thought was a very fair comment. So good luck on it. I hope it goes smoothly. We will be manning the emails and paying attention. And we have both a college level IT person and a university level IT person. This whole process, they promised us there will be no maintenance done. They say the system, since they did this patch a couple of weeks ago, has become much more stable and is working much better. But if you have problems, email us. And good luck on Thursday night. By the way, one tip, don't study Wednesday night. Relax. Get a book, read a book. Do not think. Do whatever economics you've managed to learn between now and tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Either you've learned enough that you're going to do well on the test, or you haven't. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't look over your notes and do a little priming on the day of the test, but don't kill yourself. And here's the analogy that I always give to students, because I always tell students, don't study hard right before a test. So on Saturday, A&M's playing Arkansas. Do you think Jimbo's going to put them through a really rough workout on Friday afternoon? No, he's not. Why? Because the body needs to rest. Well, guess what? Your brains get tired just the way your body does. And if you're not rested and relaxed, it's going to matter a lot. And that little bit of extra stuff you get done in a few hours, if you need that, you're done anyway. I promise you, you're not going to do well on the test if that 2 hours is going to matter to you. Okay? So good luck with it. I wish you the best, and we will be around. But take care.